Just a second. So is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, shall I start?
Sure.
I think my my video is not on.
Your video is not on, but your screen is visible.
Okay, so is I think it's fine.
Yeah.
So good evening all. I am Dr. Deepak and I am a pediatric gastroenterologist and a hepatologist, and I am presently working as additional director in Department of Pediatric Hepatology and Gastroenterology in Fortis Memorial Research Institute, Gurgaon. So today we will be discussing neonatal and infantile cholestasis and approach to neonatal cholestasis, as well as the important uh, points pertaining to the management of neonatal cholestasis. So, uh, jaundice in neonates can be uh, uh,
Dr. Deepak, sorry to interrupt. The voice
yes,
is pretty low. Can you, by any chance, increase that?
just a second. Just give me.
Much better.
It's
Much better.
okay. So we will be discussing neonatal or in oblique infantile cholestasis and the causes, etiology, how to approach a case of neonatal cholestasis, and what are the salient features and points pertaining to the management of cholestasis. So, jaundice in neonates can be unconjugated jaundice or conjugated jaundice. Conjugated jaundice is also known as neonatal cholestasis. Neonatal physiological jaundice is a common and mostly benign symptom, and it is a unconjugated jaundice, we all know, and it is very common in neonates, accounting for around 25 to 40% of cases, and it is always unconjugated, and it generally resolves in term neonates in around 2 to 3 weeks, while in preterms it can persist longer. While on the other hand, neonatal cholestasis is indicated by an increase in conjugated hyperbilirubinemia, and it is never benign, and indicates the presence of a severe underlying condition or involvement of liver. So, neonatal cholestasis or conjugated hyperbilirubinemia in a neonate or an infant can be due to a defect of intrahepatic production of bilirubin or transmembrane transport of the bile, or a mechanical obstruction, that is surgical causes, leading preventing the bile flow, leading to accumulation of bile components in liver, blood and extrahepatic tissues. The incidence of neonatal cholestasis in the West is around 1 in 2500 infants. In India, it constitutes around 20 to 30% of all the chronic liver diseases in children, reporting to the tertiary care hospitals. Uh, Hepatocellular causes constitutes around 40 to 70%, while obstructive causes, that is surgical causes, accounts for around 20 to 50% cases. Broadly, causes, etiology of neonatal cholestasis can be divided into surgical causes, parenchymal or intrahepatic causes, then transport of bile related causes, that is progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, and idiopathic cases. So, biliary atresia is the most common cause of surgical neonatal cholestasis, as well overall neonatal cholestasis. Besides biliary atresia, it can be choledochal cyst, paucity of interlobular bile duct, which can be syndromic, that is Alagille syndrome, or can be non-syndromic due to certain infections like CMV or due to cystic fibrosis. It can be due to biliary sludge. So these are the surgical causes of neonatal cholestasis. In parenchymal or intrahepatic causes, it can be due to metabolic or enzymatic disorders like tyrosinemia, hereditary fructose intolerance, or galactosemia, or it can be due to infectious causes like hepatitis viruses and toxoplasma, rubella, and CMV, or it can be due to certain mitochondriopathy. It can be due to progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis or idiopathic also. So what is the importance of discussing why we are discussing neonatal cholestasis? Because many of the causes of neonatal cholestasis, many of the surgical as well as the parenchymal causes are amenable to treatment, and if diagnosed at a correct point of time, proper therapy can be instituted and kids can be salvaged. So the most common cause of neonatal cholestasis, as we have discussed, is biliary atresia. And biliary atresia, if diagnosed at the right time, that is before 60 days, we can offer surgical correction of biliary atresia, and kids can lead a completely normal life or a reasonably longer life. So over the past few years, we have seen that the diagnosis of neonatal cholestasis is often delayed, and we as practitioners many times falsely label neonatal cholestasis as the physiological jaundice, and most of the time we don't do the fractioned bilirubin, and most of the times the referral of biliary atresia to a specialist or to a pediatric hepatologist is delayed unnecessarily. So that's why the importance of discussing neonatal cholestasis. So whenever a term infant whose jaundice has prolonged for more than 14 days, or a preterm whose jaundice is prolonged for 21 days, the child needs a proper evaluation, and the first thing which as a practitioner we can do is to check a total bilirubin and the fractionated bilirubin. So the total and the direct component of bilirubin. So once we see that the direct bilirubin component is high, then a systematic approach is necessary, and a proper referral to a concerned specialist is very important. So there are diseases which are amenable to treatment, like biliary atresia, choledochal cyst, inspissated bile syndrome. These three are the obstructive causes of neonatal cholestasis, as we have discussed. So if diagnosed properly at the right time, you can offer a proper treatment to the child. There are certain metabolic disorders like galactosemia, tyrosinemia, and hereditary fructose intolerance, which again, if diagnosed properly and there is no substantial damage to the liver, and if therapy is instituted at right time, then it can make a marked difference in the prognosis of the child. And there are certain infectious hepatitis causes like CMV or hepatitis virus, which are also easily treatable. So while approaching a child with neonatal cholestasis, these diagnoses are specifically, they have to be kept in mind while approaching a child. So what is neonatal cholestasis? So if a total bilirubin is less than 5 milligram per deciliter, then a conjugated bilirubin of more than 1 is neonatal cholestasis. Or if the total bilirubin is more than 5, then a conjugated bilirubin fraction of more than 20% of the total is defined as neonatal cholestasis. Clues to the diagnosis of cholestasis can include hepatomegaly, diarrhea, poor weight gain, irritable child, hypopigmented or acholic stools, and dark urine. But these are not necessarily, not always present, but yes, you should look for these pointers. So the principal diagnostic concerns are to differentiate hepatocellular diseases from the anatomic disorders, and diseases that are managed medically from those requiring surgical intervention. So as discussed, our aim is to differentiate whether it's a surgical cause or it's a medical cause, and secondly, to diagnose those disorders which for which you can give the treatment. So your aim should be to diagnose those disorders rapidly, for which you can institute a proper treatment and you can salvage a child. So while approaching a child, there is no single laboratory or imaging test which can differentiate surgical causes or other causes of neonatal cholestasis in all cases, and a proper approach is needed. The most important initial investigation, as we all know, whenever there is a doubt and the jaundice is getting prolonged in a term for more than 2 weeks or a preterm for more than 3 weeks, the most important initial investigation is to do a total bilirubin and a direct bilirubin. Just doing total bilirubin alone is not sufficient, and always look for a direct component out of the total component. Always look for pale stools, because always keep the biliary differential of biliary atresia as the most important diagnosis. The sensitivity, specificity, and positive predictive value of pale stool for detection of biliary atresia is around 90%. So the sensitivity and specificity of consistent pale stools is good, but positive predictive value is not very good. Although cholestasis is known to occur in babies with early onset sepsis, so whenever a neonate comes to you with sepsis and he has deranged liver enzymes or direct hyperbilirubinemia or neonatal cholestasis, so while treating sepsis, always look for underlying galactosemia, because kids with galactosemia have a very high incidence of sepsis. So always look for underlying galactosemia while treating the cases of neonatal cholestasis with sepsis. And non-normalization of LFTs even after treatment with proper antibiotics in a septic child, it is a pointer towards an underlying metabolic cause. So if you have treated sepsis properly and still conjugated hyperbilirubinemia is persisting, always look for underlying metabolic cause, specifically galactosemia. So clues from the clinical practice. So whenever you encounter a child with neonatal cholestasis, a proper history is first and foremost very important. So always inquire about the antenatal period, any previous siblings, history of similar disease in the previous sibling, how was the antenatal period, and how was the immediate postnatal period. And while examination of a child, a good head to toe examination is very important. Always look for acolic stools by yourself and try to look for 2 to 3 different samples rather than by just looking one sample, and do not trust parents, and always try to look for stools for yourself. Always try to look for high colored urine, and if most of the stools of infants are pasty, but if an infant is passing a solid stool, then it should always be pressed into a paste, and just try to see the core of the stool. Infants may present with bleeding diathesis, pruritus, deficiency of vitamins, fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, and sometimes they can present with failure to thrive. So look for these pointers also. Now there are certain clues from the clinical feature or history which can point you towards a specific diagnosis. If there is presence of underlying or associated coagulopathy, it can be due to vitamin vitamin K deficiency due to malabsorption of vitamin K in a cholestatic child. It can be a part of liver failure, and so always look for any underlying liver failure. Look for INR. It can be due to severe metabolic derangement of liver, as in neonatal hemochromatosis or tyrosinemia. So look for these specific causes. If there is underlying associated splenomegaly, it can be due to cirrhosis and portal hypertension, and as in advanced cases of metabolic disorders and biliary atresia. It can be due to intrauterine infections like torch infections, storage disease like Niemann-Pick disease, and hemolytic disorders such as RH isoimmunization. If there are associated neurological abnormalities, it can be due to sepsis, intracranial hemorrhage, metabolic, or can be mitochondrial disorders, or can be due to severe liver dysfunction leading to hepatic encephalopathy. If there is history of low birth weight, thrombocytopenia, petechiae, purpura, and chorioretinitis, always look for underlying intrauterine infections. If there is rash, microcephaly, intrauterine growth restriction, and intracranial calcification, again look for intrauterine infection. If there is facial dysmorphism, then look for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or Zellweger syndrome. These kids have a peculiar facial characteristic. If you can feel an obvious mass in upper quadrant of abdomen, right upper quadrant of abdomen, it can be a choledochal cyst. If there is cardiac murmur, it point towards biliary atresia, because some kids with biliary atresia have associated congenital heart defects, and it can be due to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome also. So the most common presentation is a well thriving child who is generally well except for jaundice and acolic stools. So if you encounter any such child, always look for biliary atresia, and as discussed, investigate rapidly, preferably within 60 days, so that proper surgical correction can be offered. If the infant is sick or having inadequate weight gain, it can be due to again infections or metabolic causes. If the infant has a peculiar odor or body or urine, it can be certain metabolic or enzymatic disorders. So this algorithm is very lucid and a very important algorithm while approaching a child with neonatal cholestasis. So the first and foremost first step is to differentiate whether the child is sick or not sick. If a child with neonatal cholestasis is sick, then order a sepsis screen. If sepsis screen is positive, most likely conjugated hyperbilirubinemia is due to sepsis or galactosemia, as discussed earlier. So treat sepsis at the earliest and always look for underlying galactosemia. If the child is sick but sepsis screen is negative, then look for underlying metabolic disorders like tyrosinemia, galactosemia, or hereditary fructose intolerance, and investigate the child accordingly. Or it can be due to certain hepatitis, infectious hepatitis like CMV or HSV. So these are the main causes of the sick child with neonatal cholestasis. If the child is not sick, then most probably it is biliary atresia. So if the child is not sick and the stools are pale, order a fasting and a postprandial ultrasound, and depending upon the findings of ultrasound, which we will discuss subsequently, you can order a liver biopsy to confirm the diagnosis of biliary atresia. And if ultrasound shows choledochal cyst, then you can direct the child directly to surgery. And if it is showing a small gallbladder, absent gallbladder, or a poorly contractile gallbladder, then most likely it is biliary atresia, and refer the child at the earliest. If the stools are consistently pigmented, in early phase, biliary atresia child can have pigmented stools, but so always keep in mind biliary atresia, but simultaneously look for other causes like metabolic disorder, other genetic disorders, and choledochal cyst also, and keep these disorders in mind and investigate the child accordingly. So severity of liver dysfunction can be measured by estimating the INR and serum albumin. So INR and serum albumin are the most important test which indicates the severity of liver dysfunction. Serum transaminases, that is SGOT and SGPT, are sensitive indicators for hepatocellular injury, but they have no prognostic value, and they just indicate that there is some liver injury, but they have no prognostic value. We do not take alkaline phosphatase very seriously while evaluating a child with neonatal cholestasis, while gamma GT has a very good role in managing or evaluating such kids. Most of the kids have high gamma GT, while there are certain disorders like PFIC, that is progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, and disorders of bile acid synthesis. These kids have low gamma GT. So whenever you encounter a child with neonatal cholestasis, always look for total bilirubin, direct bilirubin, INR, serum albumin, SGOT, SGPT, and gamma GT. So try to go for a complete LFT, because each one of the component has its own importance. Now, if you are strongly suspecting biliary atresia, that is the baby is not sick, has pale stools, and you have done an ultrasound and ultrasound is showing a small or absent gallbladder, that is fasting ultrasound, then if the baby is too small, that is less than 6 weeks, you can order a HIDA. But if the baby is more than 6 weeks, you do not have much time, so do not waste time in doing a HIDA scan, and if you have the facilities, then do a liver biopsy directly or refer the child to a pediatric hepatologist early, because there is a very narrow window for doing a surgery. So if the child is between 6 to 8 weeks, the child should directly go for a liver biopsy rather than wasting time in doing a HIDA scan. So depending upon the findings of liver biopsy, we can evaluate the child further. If the kid is more than 90 days with ascites, or if the kid is more than 120 days with biliary atresia, then the Kasai surgery cannot be offered, and you have to refer the child to a transplant center where the child can be followed, and when the appropriate time comes, the child can be offered a liver transplant. So most kids with this biliary atresia, we know that they appear well and have normal growth and development in spite of their jaundice, and this leads to parents and physicians underestimating the seriousness of the problem. So this is the irony of biliary atresia, that this is the most common diagnosis, and these kids are generally well, so you should have a high index of suspicion while evaluating such kids. And many healthcare professionals also have a misconception that all well babies with icterus have physiological jaundice. So whenever you are in doubt, as discussed earlier, always go for a total and a direct bilirubin fraction. So few points we have already discussed. Role of abdominal ultrasound. Ultrasound may provide findings suggestive of biliary atresia, and it can be used to confirm other surgically treatable conditions like choledochal cyst, inspissated bile syndrome, and choledocholithiasis. So it is a very good modality for all these surgical amenable disorders. And findings which are specific for biliary atresia includes the triangular cord sign, abnormally small gallbladder, that is the gallbladder is not visualized, or abnormally small gallbladder, or no contraction of gallbladder after feeding. A distended gallbladder alone does not rule out biliary atresia, so it's always important to order a fasting ultrasound as well as a postprandial, that is post-feeding ultrasound, that should be done after 2 hours of fasting to look for gallbladder contractility. Now, HIDA scan has a limited role in evaluation of neonatal cholestasis, because there are very high chances of getting a non-excretory HIDA scan even in kids with hepatitis and other infection and septic causes. So it has a limited role in evaluation of neonatal cholestasis, and you have to do priming before doing a HIDA scan with UDCA and phenobarbital. So as discussed earlier, kids, those who are referred late, that is between 6 to 8 weeks, each day is crucial, so do not waste time in priming the kid and going for a HIDA, and directly go for a liver biopsy. And good quality HIDA scan may not be available everywhere in the country, and so therefore delaying the liver biopsy for a HIDA scan in a old neonate is not justified. Performing a HIDA scan is optional, and one may go for a liver biopsy straight away in less than 6 weeks also, because eventually the gold standard for diagnosing biliary atresia is liver biopsy, not a HIDA scan. There are certain conditions like spontaneous perforation of bile duct, which is very, very rare, but HIDA is useful in such conditions. Now, liver biopsy is an essential investigation in evaluation of neonatal cholestasis. Besides biliary atresia, It gives you a lot of information regarding many other diagnoses like progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, infectious causes, metabolic causes. So it is the most important investigation while evaluating such kids. Characteristic histopathologic features of biliary atresia are bile duct proliferation, bile plugs in the bile duct, and fibrosis and portal tract widening. The sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy of liver biopsy in the diagnosis of biliary atresia is more than 90%. It's close to 95%. It is, when done in experienced hands, it is a very safe procedure with complication rate of less than 1%. And most important thing is that biopsy must be interpreted by an experienced pathologist in conjunction, who has idea about the clinical profile and in view of other investigation, in light of other investigation also. If you have any doubt in assessing the biopsy, always don't hesitate to take a second opinion from a different histopathologist. So there are specific diagnostic tests. If you are suspecting galactosemia, then you should go for urine for reducing substance or galactose 1-phosphate uridyl transferase level. If you are suspecting HFI, then enzymatic assay in liver biopsy sample. If you are suspecting tyrosinemia, then again the genetic test or the measurement of urine succinyl acetone or succinyl acetoacetate. If you are suspecting CMV hepatitis, then a good ophthalmologic examination and a blood CMV PCR, quantitative or a qualitative level. So in the last few years, genetics have emerged as a very important modality, and most of the metabolic disorders and enzymatic disorders are being diagnosed only with the help of genomics. So there are variety of tests available like whole genomic sequence or whole exomic sequence or gene specific, target specific genetic testing. So with the help of genetic testing, we are nowadays able to identify most of the metabolic and enzymatic or genetic disorders. Cost used to be an issue a few years back, but now the cost is gradually decreasing, and it's easily available in most of the centers and most of the cities, and the cost has also decreased in the last 5-7 years. And with the more and more research and more availability of genetic tests, we expect the percentage of patients diagnosed with a known cause of cholestasis to increase and a corresponding decrease in the idiopathic group. So just few words about medical management. So once you have diagnosed neonatal cholestasis, then the management depends upon the underlying etiology. If it is a surgical cause, then a surgery. If it is a medical cause, then depending upon the etiology, specific treatment you have to institute. But there are certain points which you need to keep in mind. Nutrition and feeding is the most important of that, and some of these kids have pruritus, so management of pruritus is again a very important point, and some of the kids have associated complications, so if it is present, you have to treat it. Most infants with cholestasis are underweight and they will need a nutrition support, and the goal is to provide adequate calories to compensate for steatorrhea and to prevent or treat malnutrition. So these kids have a high caloric requirement, and the caloric requirement is approximately 125% of the recommended dietary allowance based on the ideal body weight. So this is very important. So in breastfed infants, breastfeeding should be encouraged, and medium chain triglyceride oil, MCT oil, should be administered in a dose of 1 to 2 ml per kg in express breast milk. Medium chain triglyceride is absorbed directly and it doesn't need the help of bile salts for absorption, so MCT oil is always preferred in these kids. In older infants, a milk or cereal mix fortified with MCT is preferred, and protein is generally recommended at 2 to 3 grams per kilogram per day in such kids. So some of these kids have irritability and they have a poor appetite. So if needed, nasogastric tube feeding should be considered in such children who are not able to meet their caloric needs. So this table is again important. So kids with neonatal cholestasis have poor absorption of fat soluble vitamins and other vitamins and minerals. So fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E and K are substituted orally in a very high dose as compared to a normal requirement. And like vitamin A around 5000 international unit per day, vitamin D again around 1000 international unit per day, which is a very high dose. Vitamin E also again in a very high dose, around 200 to 400 international unit per day. And vitamin K is again very important because these kids can have intracranial hemorrhages or other ecchymosis. So regular substituting of vitamin K is very important in such kids. So it can be given orally or parenterally. Water soluble vitamins can be given 1 to 2 times the recommended daily allowance, and certain minerals like calcium, phosphorus, zinc, magnesium and elemental iron should be added in their diet. So some kids like Alagille syndrome have very significantly very severe pruritus. So such kids, antihistaminics are used for pruritus in mild cases, and UDCA is also used. It promotes bile excretion and makes it more hydrophilic, and it is used in all cholestatic children and specifically for the management of pruritus also. So this table shows the drugs which are available for treating pruritus. So the first line drug for treating pruritus is UDCA and cholestyramine. UDCA is a very safe drug. There are very few minor side effects, but in general it is a very safe drug and it is used in every kid with neonatal cholestasis irrespective of pruritus. So if there is pruritus, then bile salt binding agent like cholestyramine should be used. If the child is not responding to these two, then rifampicin can be added, and very rarely and in very severe cases opioid antagonist like naltrexone can be added. Now some kids with choledochal cysts have associated pancreatitis or cholangitis. So whenever you encounter a kid with choledochal cyst, always look for associated pancreatitis or cholangitis, and if present you have to treat it accordingly. So to conclude, neonatal cholestasis constitutes about 1/3 of the children with chronic liver disease in major hospitals in India. Early identification of the etiology is essential for a favorable outcome, and approach to neonatal cholestasis requires specific biochemical tests, proper imaging studies and interpretation of histopathology by experienced personnel. Ultrasound isotope scan, that is HIDA scan, and liver biopsy interpretation in experienced hands are effective in ruling out surgical causes in majority of the cases. And malnutrition adversely affects the outcome in infants with cholestasis. So nutritional support and vitamin and mineral supplementation is one of the most important step in the management, and it is recommended in all babies with neonatal cholestasis. So just a slide about advancement in, there are certain advancements in the management of Alagille syndrome. Just a word about there are certain molecular therapy with IBAT inhibitors which are under development, and soon I think they will be available in the market, which have shown a good response in kids with Alagille syndrome. So there are certain drugs which are available and which are under research. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepak. Deepak, for a wonderful talk. And there are questions with me, and I also request all the participants to please post their questions in the chat box. So, I've got, can I take the question, please?
So I think the voice was okay after that thing. Initially, it was low.
It was absolutely fine. I think you were on headphones and then you shift to.
I shifted to the normal mic. Initially, I was on iPhone. This thing, microphone.
Okay. I've got some questions from the delegates. The first question is, are there any specific exam the findings in head-to-toe examination for an infant or neonate with cholestasis which we should specifically look for?
So, as discussed in the one of the slides, there are specific pointers which you should always try to look for. First and most important is the overall general condition of the child, whether the child is sick or non-sick. If the child is otherwise happy with neonatal cholestasis, you should always look for biliary atresia. If the child is sick, you should keep in mind sepsis as an underlying etiology, or galactosemia, or certain metabolic disorders. Then look for facies, because certain kids with Alagille syndrome and Zellweger syndrome, they have peculiar facies which can help you in directing your investigation. Try to look for cataract, and always order a retinal examination in such kids. It indicates you about chorioretinitis and certain storage disorders like Niemann-Pick disease. And a good abdominal examination is also very important. uh, Try to look for liver consistency. If the consistency of liver is soft, it generally indicates a metabolic disorder, or that is the liver is non-cirrhotic. If the consistency of liver is firm or hard, it generally indicates that cirrhosis is being there, and maybe you are dealing with the biliary atresia, because kids with biliary atresia, they have very early cirrhosis in generally 3 to 4 months of age. Look for any murmur in the child, because kids with the biliary atresia and Alagille syndrome, they can have murmurs. Alagille syndrome have peripheral pulmonary stenosis, so they can have murmur of pulmonary stenosis, and kids with biliary atresia can also have VSD or any other underlying tetralogy of Fallot, so you can get specific murmurs. And so I think these are the major things which you should look for.
Okay, great. So second question is by Dr. Mahipal, and he wished to know if in biliary atresia before Kasai procedure, any other way of management for those children. For example, for an
So the
example, if a doctor in a tier three city has by any way diagnosed that this child could be biliary atresia and is referred to tier one city for Kasai gastroenterologist, but in between parents are taking time. So what should this physician or a pediatrician who has identified can give specific recommendation to the parents to manage
so
this?
this is a good question, and I think it's a very common scenario, because you have strong suspicion of biliary atresia. You are sure that the child is having neonatal cholestasis, and you have done a HIDA scan, and it is non-excretory. The child is otherwise well and has pale stools, and you are quite certain that the child has biliary atresia. And the child is around 5 to 6 weeks of age, and you have referred the child, but the parents are taking time. So I think first and most important thing is always give a dose of vitamin K, uh, around 5 mg, because many of these kids, they appear well and they look well and their general condition is okay, but they can have underlying vitamin K deficiency, and they can have intracranial bleed or bleed from the vaccination site. So always give a shot of vitamin K, preferably IV. If not, then use a very thin needle and give a IM injection, or you can just break the injection and you can give it orally. So first and most important thing is uh, give vitamin K. Second is to start UDCA in a dose of 15 mg, 15 to 20 mg per kg per day in two divided doses. So syrup is available in the market by the name Udcament. So always start UDCA and start the proper doses of fat soluble vitamins as mentioned in the chart. So at least you can start these things before referring the child.
Any multivitamin having all these fat soluble vitamins in one item?
No. So there is no preparation which is available in the market, and you have to give these separately. Vitamin A is available in a capsule form. You have to puncture it and mix it in milk. Again, vitamin E. Initially, we used to get drops, Evion drops, but now for the last 1 year or so, it's not available. So you have to use the capsule form. Again, you have to puncture it, and vitamin D drops you have to give separately because you need very high doses of fat soluble vitamins. So you have to tailor it as per the need of the child, and you have to give them separately. There is no fixed preparation which is available in the market.
Okay. And another question is by Dr. Lokesh Pandey, if the direct bilirubin is more than 20% in greater than 5 milligram, or any direct bilirubin more than 2 should be, or any, I mean, if uh,
No, it is if the total bilirubin is less than 5 and the direct is more than 20%, that is, the direct is more than 1 milligram per deciliter, then you should be on high alert. Or if the total bilirubin is more than 5, then more than 20%. So if it is less than 5, then more than 1 direct, and if it is more than 5 total, then more than 20% direct bilirubin is significant.
okay. Uh, the other question is the post Kasai procedure, how to do a follow up and how to manage such patients when they are waiting for transplant or for post procedure.
So this is again a very practical question. So if you have done a Kasai surgery, the initial 3 months of post Kasai surgery are very important. So you have to watch for bilirubin closely, bilirubin and SGOT, SGPT. So if the child is able to clear bilirubin within 3 months of Kasai surgery, then the prognosis is very good. You can say that it is a successful Kasai surgery. So keep doing LFT maybe at 2 week or 3 weeks interval. And second is to always look for cholangitis, because kids post Kasai, they have very high incidence of cholangitis. So always on each visit, always look for any underlying cholangitis. If the child is undue irritable, or if the child has started passing pigmented stool, but again for the last few days if the child is passing acolic stools, then keep cholangitis in your mind. And if the child has fever, take it very seriously, and do not ignore fever in a post Kasai child. There are very high chances of cholangitis, or if the child is undue irritable. So clinically look for the signs of cholangitis, and laboratory wise do serial LFTs and look for the decrease in bilirubin. I think these two things are most important. And till the time there is cholestasis, continue the fat soluble vitamins and the other vitamins and minerals as you were giving pre-surgery. So till cholestasis is settled, keep giving the vitamins. Give a Simile MCT oil rich diet or Simile MCT powder which is available formula, and look for any signs of cholangitis, and look for the LFTs. I think these four things.
Every medication has a chemoprophylaxis for a patient who underwent Kasai. Do you start any antibiotics?
So we whenever we discharge such kids, some surgeons they give whenever we discharge them on cefixime. So there is no specific guidelines for how long to give antibiotics. Some surgeons prefer Ceftriaxone as prophylaxis for 3 months, and some surgeons prefer cefixime for 2 or 3 weeks. But as such, there are no guidelines for the antibiotic prophylaxis, and each center has its own. I generally don't prefer. I don't prefer Ceftriaxone, and I generally try to give cefixime for around 1 to 2 weeks, and then I stop cefixime and I closely follow the child for any associated cholangitis.
Any specific antibiotics we should avoid in children who have ailment? Like we all know that ceftriaxone itself causes sludging in gallbladder, should be avoided in liver disorders. Any other medications, over-the-counter drugs, which should be avoided specifically?
Uh, as such, there are no specific drugs which I think you should avoid. If needed, ceftriaxone can cause biliary sludging, but if needed, you can give ceftriaxone for few days. It's not an absolute contraindication. Uh, but most of these kids, if they develop cholangitis, they will eventually need a second line antibiotic, that is piperacillin tazobactam or teicoplanin. So most of the kids with cholangitis, they don't get settled with first line antibiotic like ceftriaxone. But I don't think there is a specific antibiotic which is contraindicated, or any specific medicine which is contraindicated in such kids.
You just evaluate LFTs regularly, keep a track of them, and if at all anything is getting affected, so act accordingly, right?
Just keep a high suspicion of cholangitis, and uh, if there is anytime there is fever or ecolic stools, uh, keep cholangitis in mind and treat it early and treat it hard, and just look for serial LFTs and work on nutrition even post Kasai. Do not forget about nutrition. So till there is cholestasis, keep giving the Simile MCT as well as the vitamins.
Okay. We have three more questions. Dr. Shubhranshu from Dubai, he wished to ask about the inspissated bile syndrome treated with irrigation of biliary tree with mucolytic agents. What are your comments on that? It's in the chat box itself.
Just a second, I will just read the question. Uh, Treated with irrigation of biliary tree with mucolytic agents. So most of the first of all, I would say that inspissated bile syndrome nowadays, it is a very rare entity. I don't think I have seen any case of inspissated bile syndrome in last 5 years. So first of all, it is very rare, and uh, if you diagnose it early, I think they don't need a surgical intervention or irrigation of biliary tree, and most of the kids can be managed with good dose of UDCA and a proper hydration. Very rarely irrigation of biliary tree with mucolytic agents or saline is needed. So I think it's not needed in most of the such kids. And second question is, if biliary atresia is associated with CMV. So there are hypotheses that CMV can lead to biliary atresia even postnatally, but this hypothesis is not yet proved. And if at all, if you have encountered CMV and if the child is having neonatal cholestasis, you treat CMV according as per the CMV guidelines, and just follow the child whether the neonatal cholestasis is subsided or not. If it is persisting, then look for underlying biliary atresia. So as of now, I don't think there is a very strong correlation between CMV and biliary atresia. And so first treat CMV, and if cholestasis is persisting, you approach it as a regular case of cholestasis, as we have discussed in the algorithm.
Another question just under it, Dr. Jhansi has
How
asked.
how the oral preparations are absorbed in biliary atresia. So there is poor absorption of oral medicines as well as most of the drugs. So that's why we have discussed that most fat soluble vitamins are given 5 to 10 times the normal daily requirement, and that is vitamin A, D, E and K. And water soluble vitamins are given generally twice the RDAs. So there is poor oral absorption of most of the vitamins and minerals in each case of neonatal cholestasis, whether it's biliary atresia or any other neonatal cholestasis.
Dr. Atam Toshi from Nagaland wished to ask about the success rate of Kasai when it is done early, and also after Kasai, what is the success rate of liver transplant in cases of biliary atresia?
So the literature, there is a lot of literature in available for the success of Kasai surgery. So the success rate of Kasai surgery eventually is not very great, and there is a very strong debate which is there for many decades, that whether kids with biliary atresia should go for Kasai surgery or they should go directly for a transplant, because eventually 3 or 4 out of 5 kids will eventually need a transplant, so sooner or later. So many authors or many centers, they argue that eventually if the child has to undergo liver transplant, that you should do it early. But some centers think that even if you prolong the age of child by around 10 years or 5 years, you can add life to the kid, and doing a liver transplant at 5 years or 10 years is much easier while doing the transplant at 6 months of age. The vessels are big, the biliary tree is big. So though the overall success rate of biliary Kasai is not very good, but as of now the consensus is to do the Kasai surgery followed by liver transplant if needed. So the success rate is, I would say, 30 to 40%.
Okay. Dr. Jhansi wants to ask, is there any stem cell therapy or orthotropic liver transplant as initial treatment of choice for this CT?
Stem cell therapy for certain metabolic or enzymatic disorders are under trial, but as of now, uh, there is there is no specific stem cell therapy which can be offered to such kids. And if they have cirrhosis, I think liver transplant is the final answer in all the cases with cirrhosis.
Great. So, with this, I will be coming to my last question by our doctor, Dr. Sunil. He wished to ask if there is any minimum age required to pick up the findings in ultrasound abdomen.
Pardon, if there is any minimal age.
Minimum age required in a newborn so that this etiology of biliary atresia can be picked up in ultrasound. Let us like to make it more easier. If a 5-day child undergoes a ultrasound, can radiologist by under any circumstance miss biliary atresia? Is it possible?
So, so firstly, the child will be at least more than somewhere between 2 weeks to 8 weeks of age, because in the first 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, we will not suspect biliary atresia. So the child will be between 3 to 8 weeks. So there is no specific age, and it all depends on the expertise of the ultrasonologist. So if a ultrasonologist is confident and if he has a good ultrasound machine, I think there is no age limit, lowest age limit at which ultrasound can give you a guide. So it all depends on the expertise. It can be picked up at 4 weeks. Any which ways, ultrasound is not 100% investigation, and it just gives you a guide. So it is just I would say it is a crude method to diagnose biliary atresia. But yes, there is no minimum age at which ultrasound can be done. It can be done at 3 to 4 weeks of age.
Okay. So finally, this is question by another doctor from a WhatsApp group. He asked that is there any specific kind of milk which should be given to child after Kasai procedure, or any milk can be given?
So we we don't give the normal formula, that is the NAN or the other formula. Any child with neonatal cholestasis, we always prescribe Similac MCT formula, which is easily available in the market. It has a very high content of medium chain triglyceride, so we don't prescribe a normal formula or a normal milk to these kids. So we always prefer Similac MCT with added MCT oil.
Smile MCT along with
Simi-
MCT.
yes,
And
Similac MCT powder with added MCT oil. So it's easily available in the market in most of the cities. Similac MCT formula. We don't use the regular formula like NAN or Lactogen or the normal cow milk in such kids because there is poor absorption.
okay, okay, okay. I think we have taken all questions, and
Just one question I can see, the significance of high colored urine. So significance of high colored urine is that if the urine is constantly staining the diaper or if it is high colored, then it indicates the neonatal cholestasis, and you should be on alert and go for a total and direct bilirubin as soon as possible.
Mhm. One another question also now is visible. It says apart from fat soluble vitamin, why is absorption of water soluble vitamin also affected? I think it's mainly because of hepatoportal circulation got affected with it. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Most of the kids have uh, a deformed hepato this thing circulation, and there is some loss of enterocytes also. So there is in general a poor absorption from enterocytes in such kids.
Thank you, Dr. Deepak. It was a wonderful session and very elaborate, very interesting. Um, I think it was more of a basic to advanced from tier 1 to tier 3 city. Very nice done, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Nitin.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you for the patience listening.
thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye bye.